And at some point, we think this is the only challenge that we have between Christianity and Islam. And as long as we're able to figure out what they believe, and if we are able to reconcile or build a bridge from what we believe, like somehow to what they believe and find a common ground, and then that will be the way. Or at the same time, if we can refute their belief, that will be the only way to reach out to Muslims. Like people call this kind of discipline is apologetic or polemics. Though there's a place for apologetic in reaching out to Muslim, but I don't believe this would be the finest way, the best way to reach out to Muslims. Though I would not degrade this approach to Muslim evangelism. But at the same time, there has to be first an understanding of course, of their belief, but understanding of their way of life, understanding of their culture, understanding of their worldview dynamics. And that's where is going to lead me to this phase of the seminar, is to share with you about the Muslim worldview. Now, two concepts have often been intermingled in people's mind. Worldview is not synonymous with behavior. And again, as said, these two concepts have often been intermingled in people's mind. Behavior can be described as being on the outer rim, on the surface level of culture. Worldview, on the other hand, is at the hub, at the deep or meaningful level of culture. Now, the confusion arises from the fact that we as outsiders can discern worldview by observing, analyzing behavioral patterns, and then working our way back to the hub. There we find the core of the individual, his innermost being, his orientation toward life on which his behavior is based. Let me give kind of a definition about worldview. Worldview is a set of presuppositions or assumptions which we hold consciously or subconsciously about the basic makeup of our world. If I'm going to give definition for worldview, it is I, the center, looking at the universe, how I'm perceiving this world, this universe, how I'm looking. What is my core being? How is about my own interaction with this world? Maybe this is kind of a definition. It is the I, in a sense, looking at the world. It is the presuppositions that we have about the makeup of our world. Each one of us live within the confinement of a worldview. There's a Western worldview, there's Eastern worldview, and actually that's where the Muslim worldview is from this part of the world. Having lived and visited a number of Muslim countries, I lived in Lebanon almost for 30 years, and visited a number of Muslim countries. And having talked to scores of missionaries who served in Muslim countries, I'm amazed about how broadly uniform is the Muslim worldview in the midst of such linguistic, geographical, and cultural ethnic diversity. Though there are significant differences in details, but I believe there are many things in common among these ethnic groups that permit us, that allow us to speak about one single Muslim worldview. And we must attempt to understand the Muslim worldview from a broader perspective than merely its religious orientation. A total understanding of a people's way of life includes much more than religion. And an effective presentation of the gospel of Jesus Christ might be based on appeal to felt needs that pervade a Muslim's total way of life and thought. And the best way somehow to do this is to study, to look at the differences between the Muslim worldview and the Western worldview. Whenever we have an understanding of our worldview here in the West and we compare it to the Muslim worldview, the picture becomes clearer to us. And in a sense, to understand these differences is of utmost importance in any effective approach to Muslim evangelism. To understand these differences, and if there are any similarities, is of utmost importance in any effective approach to Muslim evangelism. Let me start by comparing the concept of unity. One of the most principal, most worthy of consideration is the Muslim love and adoration, fascination for oneness and unity. Let me ask you a question. Anybody been to a mosque before? And whenever you enter a mosque, you find yourself submerged in an atmosphere of total unity. Every element within its four walls is built in a way to avoid anything that's conspicuous or particular. No individual part or pattern is emphasized over the other. But the Muslim's fascination for unity is not limited, by no means limited to religion. It is also dominant in many areas of the Muslim culture, particularly the material products such as houses and how they dress their clothes. For instance, if you go to my country, Lebanon, I will take you to a village or an inner city where uniformity will be evidenced by the way houses are built, by the house structure, to the point where you see that every house is a replica of another. But not only that, we see this is also resembled, expressed, demonstrated in the way the women dress their clothes, their love for unity. If I'm going to ask you, how does women, dress the clothes? Anybody can give me an idea? What do they have? They put the scarf. Usually, what do they have? A long, most of the time, black dress. And most of the time, we see the similarity in how women dress their clothes. And this is a reflection of their concept of unity. We see it in the houses. We see it in the way they dress their clothes. We see it in the mosque. But whenever we speak about the West, I feel like the the West here is a product of various cultural influences. The essential thing here in the West, if uniformity is worthwhile, keep it. But if it's not, then discard it. So that's why here I wrote, diversity rather than uniformity is highly regarded. This is the first dynamic that we have to understand about the Muslims whenever we think about reaching out to them. The second dynamic is time. Muslims have a high regard for historical perspective. Muslims are oriented toward the past. Their past is their life. What they are today doesn't matter. They glory in what they were in the past. The future enters very little into the thinking of a Muslim. To some extent, they consider it presumptuous to speak about the future, probably due to the fatalism of their religion. The present is a definite consideration for the Muslim, but its impact is secondary to that of the past. Muslims have little interest of specific designation of time. For instance, here in the West, you say, I'm going to visit you tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. While a Muslim will say, I'm going to visit you tomorrow evening. And that evening can be any time between 5 and 11. No specific designation of time. While here in the West, there is an emphasis. We are more what? Past-oriented, or we are future-oriented. The past is seen as outdated and relevant to the breaking development of the here and now, to the fast breaking development of the here and now. The future is enjoyable, but only whenever it's measured in the light of the future. The present is enjoyable, but only whenever it's measured in the light of the future. Planning, strategizing, goal setting, evaluating are all activities that push the Westerner forward in the pursuit of a successful future. In the beginning, we saw unity for Muslims, diversity in the West. We see, according to time, Muslims oriented toward the past. In the West, we are oriented toward the future. Let's keep on going. And whenever we look at family, the interrelation between, or the interaction between the family members run so deep. Of course, in a Muslim society, generally speaking, a family will either live in one big house or several adjoining houses. Income and expenses are shared by all the members of the family, but controlled by the head. Also, the property is shared by all members of the family as well. The extended family enjoy a greater measure of solidarity and safety and unity. In time of economic hardship or illness or even death, somebody else from the family will raise up to the pedestal and take care of responsibilities. Also, the extended family assists the newlywed couple with child rearing, cooking, and other household chores. Arranged marriages, the submission of the wife to the husband, the close-knit family, and the nature of relationship among the family members all bear strong resemblance to the condition in Islamic lands. So this is whenever it comes to family. Whenever we're going to speak about the nuclear family here in the West, maybe we are looking at more individualistic point of view. Yes, of course, they are family, but to the point that everybody is responsible for his own self. Independence rather than interdependence is more valued here in the West. Those are all worldview dynamics that we have to adhere to if we are going to reach out to Muslims. We have to be familiar with. The Islamic concept of peace is to be well, health and prosperity, and peace in this life and in the next. Anybody can tell me, what does the Muslim use as a greeting and as a farewell? Anybody heard this before? What do they use as a greeting? Salamu alaikum. You know, they use this as a greeting and also they use it as a farewell. Similar to the Jews of the Old Testament times, somehow also Muslims have an idea about peace, past, present, and future. It embraces past, present, and future. It is internalized and externalized. It is integration, harmony, and the total way of life. While whenever we look at peace, how peace is observed here in the West, the Western has more, he tend to internalize peace and put it more on a spiritual category. That's why the Western concept or the Christian concept of peace is not as broad or all-inclusive as the Muslim view of peace. Anybody can help me? What does, also peace according to Jews? Anybody know what is the word peace in Hebrew that also is used many times? What's this? Shalom. And they have the same understanding. The idea of shalom is similar to the idea of salam in Islamic understanding. Like I said, it's embraced past, present. It's not only internalized, it's externalized, it's integration, it's harmony, it's a total way of life. That's why they keep on using this terminology, or this greeting. Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam, in the Muslim culture and among the Muslim people. So we have to understand, you see the differences, and we have to be aware of these differences whenever we think about reaching out to Muslims. One of the greatest strategy in a Muslim life is whenever dishonor is brought upon a family's name. This shame will cause internal convulsion within the complete extended family structure. The hurt, embarrassment, and perplexity of family dishonor will have negative effect on the reputation and the family name of future generation. This is why, a critical question in all arranged marriages in the Muslim world, is he or she from a good family? Because honor for them is very important. That's why we call this worldview, this is an honor-shame culture, honor-shame sentiments, honor-shame context. And that's where Muslims live within this context. Here we are more oriented toward guilt, innocence, than being oriented toward honor. Yes, people have a high regard, high priority for honor, but they're really more oriented toward innocence. Whenever you hear somebody want to come to Christ, he feels guilty about his sin and he only finds solace and salvation and deliverance in Christ because he wants to be saved from his addiction. Why? Because he's oriented toward guilt and he is seeking forgiveness. He's seeking innocence, righteousness. While Muslims, what they seek in their life is not innocence, they seek honor. And they abhor and they turn their way from being dishonored or shame. Also, status. In Muslim society, status is more assigned than earned. This could arise from inherited wealth or property, an honorable family name, or it could arise from advanced age. I've often watched with amazement, observed with amazement how a well-educated middle-aged man will go to his illiterate father asking for counsel. The father has a dual status rising from kinship as well as from advanced age. While here in the West, we place emphasis on achieved status, on achievement. The person can come from any background. The most important criteria here in the West, what he or she has achieved. A family background is of no significance, of no consideration. His status here in the West is achieved by tremendous volume of hard. Again, we're looking at the differences between both. And we're seeing, like how we can come to a place whenever we want to engage Muslims, we have to understand where they're coming from. What is their background? What is their cultural background? What is the worldview dynamics in order to be more effective in our evangelistic outreach? Individualism, the Muslim does not value an autonomous approach to life. He derives strength and security from dependence rather than independence. Conformity has a higher social value in a Muslim society rather than non-conformity. Whenever anybody want to take a big decision in the family, if he's going to travel to the West, who's going to marry, he's not going to take the decision by himself. He has to consult. He has to bring a consensus what the family also has to say about this big decision. And that's why they're not oriented toward individualism. They are more oriented toward collectivism. That's what we call it. Like our worldview in the West is individualistic, while their worldview, the most important factor or dynamic in the worldview, that it is collectivistic. Like they include the family, they include the community, they include everyone in their decision making. Now we come to the dynamic of change. Here in the West, change is seen as synonymous with progress. Innovation is something good for the society. One of the most descriptive words here in the West is dynamic. They're always seeking change. Now, whenever we look at the Muslim, we find that he's caught in a dilemma and a problem in the 20th or 21st century. He wants to seek progress, he wants to seek innovation, he wants to seek change, keep on moving forward, but his religion does not allow for him to move forward. Actually, that's why we have the rise of these fundamental Islamic groups, fundamental extremism, Muslim extremists, that they want to bring the people back to the 7th century Quranic value system. Why? Because in such a way they will safeguard their culture from any Western influences. And in a way they are succeeding in that. That's why those fundamentalists rise to the pedestal in many of the Arab Muslim countries, because they are afraid of the Western infiltration that's coming through the internet, through the media, through movies, Instagram, Facebook, and all the other movies, Hollywood. So they are scared of this kind of transformation that's taking place in their communities. And that's why Islamic fundamentalism rise to the pedestal in a way to safeguard their community and their culture from the Western penetration, with all of the characteristic that they have on the media level, on the social level, and many different aspects as well. So this is also, we see the difference, again, between the Muslim worldview and also the Western worldview. Actually, maybe this would be the last one is efficiency. Again, the West has a high regard for efficient production. And actually, the assembly line here in the West is somehow is a resemblance, is a consideration for this high goal in Western society. Whenever we look to Muslims, they have very little interest in efficiency. Why? Because he is people oriented. His focus in life is on relationships. Here in the West, we're so much focused on being task oriented to accomplish our work efficiently and successfully. Though this can exhaust us and make us feel depressed here in the West, but ultimately, at the end of the day, efficiency is attained, no matter how we feel about it. But this is a worldview dynamic that play here in the West. While whenever we go to the Muslim dynamic, the Muslim worldview, the man's focus in life is on relationship. That's why if I take you to Lebanon or different parts of the Middle East, those the assembly line over there is almost non-existent. Why? Because the focus is more on relationship with people and spending time with family, and they're oriented toward the community more than they are oriented toward efficiency, more they are task-oriented in their approach to life. Now, why I was sharing this with you, the gospel communicator not only has to embrace but appreciate these dynamics if he wants to reach out to Muslims. He should have an understanding of these dynamics and somehow appreciate, because if you do not appreciate what they have, how are you going to reach out to him? How are you going to influence his life, especially for those who are thinking of going onto the mission field as well, especially when they are not living in a predominant cultural influence country like Southeast Asia or the Middle East or North Africa. You will be faced with these cultural worldview dynamics. And if you do not embrace and appreciate it, I would recommend or I would advise you to come back home. So these are very important whenever we consider Muslim evangelism, reaching out to Muslims. Let's get into the practical things. How now we have an understanding of the Muslim theological tenets, law and practices of Islam. We know the worldview dynamics.